and how they're going to change a big dynamic in world power in terms of what was going on and the trends about imperialism and European powers. And what we want to know is that the first thing you want to mention is that for a long time, Japan completely was isolated from the rest of the world. And not because the rest of the world didn't want to deal with them, but Japan is a society that doesn't want outside influence. They're content on being isolated. They operated with a feudal society and the same concepts for hundreds and hundreds of years. So while the rest of the world was kind of advancing, they were stuck in this model that was kind of like feudalism from the European world. If you remember from your world history, where you had like a king who had various lords who owned manors, and the lords had vassals under them, and they had knights protecting the people, and you had merchants and artisans and things like that, and peasant farmers. The structure you see right here in front of you, that's the Japanese society, and it's very simple. Excuse me. You had the emperor who was in charge of the country, but the emperor didn't really exercise a great deal of power, and there's reasons for that. The real leader of the time you see right here is underneath the emperor, the shogun, and the shogun was the one calling the shots. The country was really divided up into like little regions with what was called a daimyo. The daimyo were like the little governors or warlords of their particular area, and they utilized the samurai to keep order and to go to war for them when necessary. And you see the stratification of different people there in terms of the classes, the salespeople, artisans, peasants, and that's where most of the population was going to fall too. And Japan is perfectly content living this type of life, and it had been living this type of life for quite some time, for hundreds of years. But in the 1850s, the United States showed up with warships, modern warships, and basically told the Japanese that if they didn't start trading with uh, the United States would use force. And the Japanese started to understand that they were outgunned, that they didn't stand a chance against American warships and guns and cannons. And so Japan is going to change what they do. The emperor of the time who's going to change Japan for the better is Emperor Meiji. Emperor Meiji is going to introduce a great deal of reforms to his country. He decides that modernization is the path. He says the only way to beat Western powers, the Western world, the United States and Europe, is to become like them. And so he puts Japan on this collision course with um, modern living. And so Emperor Meiji decides one of the best things that he can do is start to adopt their ways. So Meiji sends out Japanese officials to various countries to learn the ways in which they do things. I'm not talking about just military, but economics, culture, style, even the way that they dress. And Meiji decides that this is how we're going to function. He brings outsiders into Japan so that they can teach people how they need to change. They adopt a more modern army. The government is going to change where Meiji is going to centralize power. That means the emperor is going to step up and start taking control of government. And these daimyo, these regional warlords, are going to lose a lot of their authority, their ability to run their little regions. And so Meiji kind of changes things. But Japan's got problems. As an island nation, one of the biggest detriments to them modernizing and industrializing and changing the way that they do their economics, their military structure, they have very few natural resources. There's not a lot of arable land. Japan's fairly mountainous, and they don't have a lot of natural resources. And if you don't have a lot of natural resources, you're going to have to take them. And so Meiji decides that not only are we going to have to modernize, but we're going to have to adopt some of the other strategies of the Western world. And you see right here, Japan decides that the easiest targets are countries that they never really liked in the first place. Strange thing here, China, Japan, Korea, even if you go into Southeast Asia, ethnically they're not dissimilar, but they don't like each other. It's been one long series of one country exploiting the others. And Japan decides that modernization means moving into Korea and into Manchuria, That's going to be their aim for taking resources. And you can see those areas right here are marked with certain deposits, including gold, iron, coal, things that they're going to need if you're going to create a modern society. And so Meiji understands, though, that this is going to put them into conflict with another country. If you remember, Russia and the Tsar, they are wanting to expand into that same region. And so now both countries want to exploit Korea and Manchuria and get access to those resources. And that's going to fling those two countries into a war against one another. The Russo-Japanese War in 1904 is a bit of a shock for most people. A lot of folks thought the Russians, as a European power, would just simply mop the floor with Japan, but not true at all. In a quick 6 month period, the Japanese wipe out a huge portion of Russia's naval fleet, and to make a very long story short, Japan's going to win this war, which means not only do they get access to the land that they wanted, that they can colonize now and get those resources, but the rest of the world has to look at them differently now. The rest of the world understands that Japan is kind of a rising power and that there's somebody that's a formidable opponent in international politics, economy, and now in war. It also serves notice to smaller countries who have been colonized. If you want a roadmap to how to defeat a European power, Japan's just given you one. That you're going to have to modernize, you're going to have to adopt the strategies and tactics that they use. It's the first time that a non-European nation really defeats a European nation in a modern war, and so it kind of serves notice. But the Japanese are a little raw about the result of this war. Fun fact, Teddy Roosevelt, the American president, he's the actual mediator in the peace talks between the two. And even though Japan gets access to the land that they wanted, they felt like they weren't treated like the winners of this war. They felt like the settlement, the ultimate settlement, was not exactly what they were hoping for. They hoped for more land, more access to resources, more recognition internationally, and they believe they didn't get it. And so they feel slighted in a way. They feel slighted by the Americans, they feel slighted by the Western world as a whole, and it's going to be one in a series of different events that's going to make Japan feel like the West just doesn't appreciate them, value them, or respect them.